So today we're going to talk about heart health in general. I put the tagline hormones and heart health because that gets people excited, but really we want to talk about heart health. And in fact, there are some interesting things to talk about in terms of how hormones interplay with heart health. And I want everyone, if you have questions, write them down. You already pointed out we have a bunch of questions to go over, so keep me honest and make sure I go over all those. If I don't, we'll circle back at the end and answer them. But the first question is, what is heart disease? And I want to broaden this a little bit. We always talk about heart disease and you hear about heart disease, but really what we're talking about is your entire cardiovascular system. Cardio being your heart and vascular being your vessels. Because the issue is broader than just your heart. It actually involves your vessels. And so what we're talking about is everything that encompasses heart attacks, strokes can be involved in that, issues with vessels in your legs where people can get cold legs, or they get numbness in their feet, or they can't walk properly because of the health or the disease of the vessels. And cardiovascular health has to do with a couple of things. One that we hear about all the time is an association between heart disease and cholesterol, right? Everybody's heard that association. And the reason why we make that association is because all humans, from almost the minute we start putting food in our mouths, start getting buildup of fats and plaques inside our vessels. It's just the nature of being human. Some people do that at a faster rate than others, and we know that there are some factors in our lives that can cause us to do that at a faster rate. And one of those factors is cholesterol. Turns out cholesterol is not a simple story, though. There are different types of cholesterol, and they have different impacts. And in fact, one of the types of cholesterol we now call the good cholesterol, your HDL cholesterol. So if someone asks you what's your good cholesterol, that's the one they're talking about. And that is actually a type of cholesterol that, to put it simply, goes around and cleans fat out of your vessels. So the more of that you have, the better. So not all cholesterol is bad, and not all fat in your diet leads to bad cholesterol, because there's good cholesterol. And if your fat is too low, you won't make the good kind either. So it's actually a more complicated story than just heart disease, and it's actually broader than just cholesterol. It's much more complicated. It would be nice if we could tell a simple story, do this one thing and only do that, and then you'll be healthy, but it's actually not that simple. It's a lot more complicated. The other piece of cardiovascular health and disease is activity. I don't know who made us, but whoever did or however we got here, we're made to move. Human bodies are made to move, and they're healthiest when they're moving. Babies in utero are moving, right? And if babies don't move inside, they don't develop well. From the very beginning, part of our design is movement. And so part of our cardiovascular health has to do with how much we move our bodies. So that aerobic exercise, the running, the biking, the hiking, the getting your body moving, even walking, is going to be part of what helps keep you healthy. So part of it is your genetics, the people you come from, you had no control over that. Part of it is those modifiable factors having to do with diet, and part of it is moving activity. So that all goes into your heart health. Specific diseases, just to recap: heart attacks, strokes, and vessel disease, what we call vascular disease. All right, so what is your risk of heart disease, and how do you calculate it? How do you know? Like I said, there are going to be a lot of links in this, if I can find the mouse, in this presentation, and one of them, I usually can operate my mouse here. Hopefully this will open. Oh shoot, I run into this all the time where it opens on the laptop but not on the screen. I don't know how to make that different. But this takes you to a website, and like I said, I'll give you all of this so you don't have to worry about writing stuff down. It takes you to a website from one of the National Institutes of Health Centers, where it talks through what numbers you need to know. What's your cholesterol? I mentioned before, good cholesterol, your bad cholesterol, where does it come from? Talks about your blood pressure. That's one of the numbers you should definitely know. Another one is your body mass index, and I'll take a minute to just define that. And nothing is a simple story. So body mass index is a proportion of your weight for your height, right? And you'll hear people say, well, that's not really accurate anyway. And that's true if you're super muscular or you're like a little person. But if you're the majority of us who are not super muscular, Olympic weightlifters and bodybuilders, or you're not a little person, BMI is pretty accurate for you. And basically, you can do a calculation. You can go online, and this link will take you to it. You can calculate your own. But basically, what we're trying to get a sense of is how lean are you, or how much adipose or fat tissue do you have? And what difference does that make? Like I said, our bodies start accumulating fat the minute we are born, and not just on our skin where we can see it, but inside our vessels. And actually, the one inside our vessels is way more important. So that calculation of your body mass index, your weight to your height, is an approximation. That's all it is. It is trying to get at, since we can't see inside our vessels every day, what's happening on the outside and sort of correlating it to what's happening on the inside. So there's a general trend. If your body mass index is 17 to about 24, you tend not to have a lot of fat inside your vessels, right? If your body mass index is 25 to 30, a little bit more, over 30, and so on, right? There's a trend in that direction. Now, I'm being very careful not to say that a high body mass index means you have heart disease, because that is not true. You can have a high body mass index and be healthy. Remember I talked about that movement, right? So if you're moving your body a lot, if you're eating well, and your body mass index happens to be 28, 29, 30 to 31, then you may very well be healthy. You may very well have none of the risks, the other internal risk factors that we worry about, the high blood pressure, diabetes, cholesterol. So it's a trend. You generally want to be at the lower body mass index, but I don't want people to get fixated on that as if it's the only thing. Because people can make themselves unhealthy trying to get to that lower number, defeating the purpose, right? So it's not just being smaller, it's what you're doing along the way. That number is just an approximation of your health on the inside, and that's the important piece. Now let's see. Alrighty, hold on one sec. Alright. There we go. Any questions so far? Because this one little topic just has so much packed in it that if you get confused, stop me at any time, just raise your hand. And I just put some stats in here. We hear a lot, so much in the media about women and breast cancer. And while that's important, don't get me wrong, heart disease is the #1 killer of women. And in fact, for a couple of decades now, more women than men die of heart disease every year. We used to think of heart disease as a male disease, and that's not been the case for a long time. One of the reasons why more women than men die of heart disease these days is because we thought of it as a male disease, and because science and life is biased towards men. The research that we did on heart disease, one, studied men more, it just enrolled more men in the studies, and also we conceived of heart disease the way men get it, and the way it appears in men. And so we've been pretty good, actually, at figuring out what works to reduce men's risk in the way that they get heart disease, and also the therapies that we have work better for men. There are some ways that heart disease presents, and we'll talk about that later, that in women, that means we miss it a lot, because those classic signs we hear of, chest pain and pain down your left side, a lot of women may not get that. And so they may miss that they're having signs of heart disease. And so we have a ways to go in terms of research. But the first thing we need to do is make women aware, hey, this affects us too, and it affects us in great numbers, and hundreds of thousands of us die from heart disease. #1 killer. 1 in 3 women will die from heart disease versus 1 in 31 from breast cancer. Okay, so to the hormone part. Because hormones do have something to do with it, just not as much as we think. So our bodies are totally driven by, because remember, hormones are the way our bodies communicate internally, right? Externally we use words, internally our bodies use hormones. So everything in your body is controlled by hormones, essentially. But the key ones that we can intervene on, the key ones that we can test, the key ones that we know how they work, because there are a lot of them we don't know how they work, are these. Thyroid hormone, TSH. This is a hormone, we call the thyroid the master gland in your body, because the thyroid controls everything about your body. your sleep, your mood, your weight, your periods, your sense of your temperature, the thyroid controls. So sometimes women will think that they have a problem with their estrogen and progesterone, or they may think they have depression, and it may be thyroid disease. So almost always, if you present to your doctor and you're having mood issues, or you're having bleeding problems, or you're having feeling cold all the time, or hot flashes, we're gonna check your thyroid hormone, because that can pretend to be anything. And it also controls your heart rate, right? So whether your heart rate beats fast or slow, sometimes the only sign of a thyroid problem, someone says, God, my heart races all the time. People who have thyroid disease that is unchecked, and this is rare because we have modern medicine, can get heart attacks and die, because your thyroid controls how your heart functions. So that's a pretty important one. About 15% of women over their lifetimes will wind up with a thyroid problem. So if you go to the doctor on a regular basis, after about 35, 40, you should be getting your thyroid checked on some kind of basis. Yearly, every other year, every third year, but on some kind of basis you should be just checking it out, especially if you have women in your family who have thyroid disease, because it trends toward running in families. So someone in your family is taking thyroid medicine or had a hyperthyroid or hypothyroid, you probably want to get it checked on some kind of regular basis. So thyroid hormone is important. Estrogen and progesterone. For women, and unfortunately this is one of the sad facts of medicine in this country, they're often told it's your hormones, right? But you've probably heard that people have said, your hormones are off. That's why your mood is this way, or you're this, or you're that. And unfortunately that happens in emergency rooms too. Women go in complaining of palpitations, like I said, or they're complaining of chest pain, and they'll hear, oh, you're probably menopausal, right? And hormones have something to do with it, but not that much. So the key thing to know about these two hormones for women is that when we're younger, when we're premenopausal, when we're still having periods, estrogen actually is protective. So you will see fewer young women have heart attacks than young men. It's rare to see a woman in her 40s or her 30s have heart attacks or heart disease. And then once we're postmenopause, it turns out that hormones the action of hormones in a woman's body are different when she's through menopause than before. Like I said, estrogen tends to be protective when we're younger. Postmenopause, so in the old days when we were thinking of medicine through a male model, the thought was, well, if it's good when you're young, must be good when you're older too. So let's give women hormone replacement. It'll be healthier for them. As it turns out, that thinking was wrong, because when you're postmenopausal, when your ovaries have said, okay, we're closing up shop, the natural, normal, healthy state of your body is not to have hormones, right? So premenopausal, estrogen, progesterone, cycling every month, right? You get that period every month. Postmenopausal, the healthy, normal state of your body is not to have high estrogen. Now here's the trick though. Our bodies are pretty complicated. I always say, women are like Ferraris. We're like expensive sports cars. We're very finely tuned. You can't just do anything with our bodies. And the sort of colloquial is, oh, you're so complicated. Well, yes, we are, but in a very good way. Fancy things are complicated, but that doesn't mean we can't understand them, right? And our women's bodies are no different. So when you're menopausal, if you continue taking hormones from before menopause right through menopause until you die, your body somehow thinks, oh, I always had hormones, I have hormones, no change, no different, no big deal. And you tend to see fewer bad effects of the hormones, right? Or side effects of the hormones. If you stop and let your body go to that state I was talking about, where the natural state of your body is not to have hormones, and then you add them back, that's where you see problems, right? And we learned that in that famous study that a lot of you probably heard about, the Women's Health Study, where it said women shouldn't take hormones after menopause. Well, that wasn't as complicated as we are. That was a simple message. The message is more complicated. If you're on hormones because you're premenopausal, you're having periods, and you start taking hormones and then you continue, no one knows when it becomes problematic, right? You just continue and your risk remains low. If you are premenopausal having periods, you stop, no hormones. 5-6 years from now, your friend says to you, hey, but I take hormones. You should take them too. It'll make your hair better, your skin better, you'll sleep better, and you start taking hormones. That's where you run into trouble, because your body has made that transition into its new natural state of lower hormones. And when you add them back, that's where you can run into trouble.
Does it matter how much time has passed from the time that you?
It seems to. So it's not on the order of a few months, it's years. So, and this just to give you a little insight, in that WHI study that looked at hormones and said, oh, you shouldn't take them, the average age in that study was actually 60. And the reason it was 60 is because they didn't want women who are having a lot of hot flashes not to get medicine for it, right? Because that would be mean, right? Because the women got randomized, medicine, no medicine. And also you'd be able to tell. You'd be able to tell exactly who wasn't getting hormones, because the women who were having terrible hot flashes, they'd be sweaty. You could see it right in front of you. And that would kind of interfere with the result they were trying to get. So those women in that study were a little bit older than your typical menopausal age, which is about 51. The average age of menopause is 51. So those women were 9 years older than women typically are when they go through menopause. And we learned what I just shared about the timing of adding back hormones, because people went back and looked at the data and put it by age group. And what they found was that the younger women, the women who were around 51, 55, they didn't have the increased risk. It was the 60-year-old women. So if you're off, so our rule of thumb is 5 years, then you shouldn't restart. But I would say a lot of us are a lot more conservative. Or if it's been 2 years, we wouldn't even restart you. Just because your body has made that transition into its new state, and that's how it likes it, to have low hormones. So estrogen and progesterone matter, but they don't matter as much, or in the ways that we heard about. The other way that estrogen matters is, we know that estrogen, and this won't seem to make sense at first, because I said, when you're young, estrogen protects against heart disease. But estrogens in general, if I give a woman an estrogen, all comers, it increases their risk of getting blood clots. Now, it doesn't increase it nearly as much as having a baby, right? So pregnancy increases your risk way more. And that's why birth control pills are still safe, because birth control pills protect you against pregnancy. So even though they increase your risk of clotting, pregnancy really increases that risk. So anything that protects you against pregnancy still keeps your risk low. Does that make sense? So it's a relative. And that risk continues all your life. So if you're taking estrogen at 23, it increases your risk. If you're taking it at 63, it increases your risk, but by a little bit. So estrogens would continue to be safe for women remember, let's talk about the women who are starting right at menopause, for a long time, unless if that woman has another risk factor for blood clots. She has a big surgery. She is lucky enough to go to Paris in first class, and she lays still for 9 hours. That's going to increase her risk. You wouldn't want to add those things together. So someone taking estrogen who has a 9-hour surgery, high risk for blood clotting. Someone taking estrogen who takes a long trip and is lying still, increase your risk of blood clotting. Someone on estrogen, you put them on another medicine that increases blood clotting, right? On estrogen, you get another type of cancer. It doesn't even have to be a breast cancer. That would increase her risk of clotting. So you wouldn't want to add things together as she gets older, because aging increases your risk of clotting. Aging and low dose estrogen, no problem. But you add one more thing onto that, that's too dangerous. That's where we would take the estrogen away. So like I said, women are not simple, and that's why you need a physician. You need someone on your team to help you sort through this. What are your risk factors? What's going on for you? What medicines are you on? To help you think through that so you make safe decisions, right? Because it's not simple. Women are not simple. Other hormones that make a difference, insulin. Insulin is a hormone that our bodies make to control our blood sugars. Now, diabetes is common. Diabetes is a condition where you don't control your blood sugars well, so the sugar inside your body and your vessels remains higher. We know that some combination of insulin and glucose, because we don't completely understand which is the bad actor, can also damage your vessels. Diabetics have much higher risks of heart attacks than people who are not diabetic. They have much higher risk of vessel disease. You've all heard of diabetics who needed to get amputations, who don't heal well, and that's because their vascular system doesn't work as well. And so there's some combination of insulin and glucose that affects the health of our vessels, and studies are still trying to figure that out. So I was talking about things you can modify. Definitely your blood sugar is one. If you have diabetes, you want it to be well controlled. You want to take your medicines because that can damage blood vessels as well and increase your heart disease risk. Cortisol is a hormone in our bodies that we make when we're stressed. And I don't mean stress like you have a heart exam. I mean stress like you're very ill, or stress like you are having a big surgery, or stress like you were in a big trauma, right? Your body makes a lot of cortisol. I mean, we make it too when we're stressed, but we just don't make as much. And we think there's some relationship between cortisol and your blood pressure and your heart disease, but that relationship isn't nearly well enough worked out so that we can tell you things to do, right, to modify it. But it definitely plays a role. And then testosterone also plays a role. Like I said, men have higher rates of heart disease than women. The balance between not having estrogen, which men, they have a little, but they don't have as much, and high testosterone, we don't know which plays the greater role in men and heart disease. We definitely know we can't give them estrogen because it gives them too many side effects. And we know that if testosterone is too high, it does increase your risk of heart disease, that you get more heart attacks. So there's a big fad in medicine now to give men testosterone, to say their testosterone is low, and we know that men get more heart attacks when that happens. But the exact relationship between, is it the lack of estrogen versus too much testosterone, we don't know for normal men, you know, men who are not giving extra testosterone. But it does definitely play a role in cardiac disease. So, should I have my hormone tested? I won't click on the link because it won't open for you to see it. In very small, a small set of circumstances do you need your hormones tested. And by hormones, people usually mean your estrogen and progesterone. I talked about reasons why you might get your thyroid hormone tested, right? And that is all true. Estrogen and progesterone, it's seldom necessary or useful to test them. And here's why. Every month we have a cycle when we're premenopausal, right? We have a cycle. Estrogen will be high in the beginning of that cycle. Progesterone will be high at the end of that cycle. So your hormones change throughout the month. And I'll show you in a minute normal ranges for those. And so there's very little that those levels tell you about anything right or wrong in your body because they change as they should. It's normal for them to change. So let's say I get a value of 10 of estrogen. What does that mean in terms of symptoms? So it's not very helpful to test those hormones because we know that they change. So that's for women who are having normal periods. Let's say you're in the perimenopausal phase and you come in and you're like, oh my God, my mood is crazy, my bleeding is crazy, can you test my hormones? Well, the problem there is that the reason you have those symptoms is because as your ovaries are winding up shop, they're shutting down, they're decreasing their function, well, your hormones go up and down, and that's why you have the symptoms, because the hormones are going up and down like crazy. So if I were to test, I could get you up here, and tomorrow you're here. I could get you normal, and you're still having the symptoms, or I could get you low, and then tomorrow you're high. So testing doesn't help us. We have to address what are the symptoms you're having, and then we try to fix it. So the number on a test of estrogen and progesterone is hardly ever helpful. There are times where it is helpful. Let's say you are 56, and you come in and say, I haven't had bleeding for 6 months, but I started bleeding today. A number on your hormone that's high, your brain tells your ovaries to work, so we look for that hormone being high. That number may say to me, you know what, she shouldn't be bleeding, let me do a further workup, because it looks like she's menopausal. One place. If you're trying to get pregnant, there are other times we look at these hormones to help you get pregnant. Aside from those two things, it's hard. So it's a hormone test for estrogen and progesterone, I hardly ever do, because they're seldom helpful.
How about post?
Even so, postmenopausal, they only help us if you're doing something we don't think you should be doing, like bleeding, and we want to know, are you really menopausal or not? So for example, recently, I had someone who's about 53, I want to say, and she, there's another complicating factor for her. I want to say she has an IUD or something funny like that. And so we don't know, are you menopausal or are you not? I'm not sure. And we tested, and in fact, our FSH, the hormone we look for, was like 5. So it's like, girl, no, you're not menopausal. The reason you're having these symptoms is because you think you're menopausal because you have a Mirena, you're not having periods, but actually you're not. Your ovaries are still doing what they're supposed to do. So that's the only way these tests help us, is if you're having a symptom, we're not sure which category you fit in, and they kind of help us to categorize you. Or a young woman who stops having periods and we're trying to figure out, wow, are her ovaries failing? We might use it there. So postmenopausal data, I can't really think of a way that testing your hormones, if you are, this is one place, if you got those hormone pellets that people in town like to do, or you're doing bioidentical hormones and you come in with a symptom. And it could be your mood is drastically different, or you have a lot of bleeding, or your boobs hurt all of a sudden and you're 65 or 70. And I want to know, is it because your pellets are doing something funky and your estrogen level is 400 where it should not be? Or is it because the batch of hormones, sometimes when you're doing compounded hormones, the batch can be very different from batch to batch, the amount of hormone you're getting. And so I might test you to see, yep, it is, something's going on with the hormone we're giving you. So I might use it for that. That's another place, but for routine, they're not helpful. So that said, what screening test should you get? Well, I talked about your thyroid. We talked a little bit about cholesterol. So checking your cholesterol, if your cholesterol is normal, I wouldn't check it every year. Every 2 to 3 years is plenty. But if it's not, you might want to check it more often just to see where you are. And you want to know, when you look at your cholesterol, like I said, that handout goes into the whole breakdown of cholesterol. But you want to know what your total cholesterol is, what your good cholesterol is. Before I forget, I want to say one more note about cholesterol. We think of cholesterol as associated with fat consumption, right? People go low-fat diet to lower your cholesterol. Well, it's not one-to-one. So every time you put fat in your mouth doesn't mean your cholesterol goes up. Half of the cholesterol you make is based on your genetics, what you inherit from your family. You can't change that, right? That's just who you are and how your body works. And then the other part of it is related to eating fat, but part of it is related to eating carbohydrates. When we eat carbohydrates, the nutrients first go through our livers, and our livers make some fats. Part of it stay in our liver. So if anyone has ever heard of fatty liver, you get fatty liver not because of your fat consumption, you get fatty liver from carbohydrate consumption, right? And so a couple of the numbers in your cholesterol that you get in your cholesterol breakdown are actually related to carbohydrate metabolism. So that's important to know.
Fiber is carbohydrate or processed?
Typically, fiber we don't, so there are 2 types of fiber. There's soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. Soluble was the one we absorb, but all fiber is good. So fiber is good. Americans need to get way more fiber in their diets. Fiber is good. Unless you're constipated, in which case we'll talk about it. But it's the simple carbohydrates that get us. One, because Americans eat more of that than anything else. If we would only eat wild rice in the whole week, but we don't. We tend to eat the carbohydrates that are in bread and potatoes and corn and pastries and that we sweeten our drinks with, and those are the ones that tend to get us, just because we just consume so much more of those. Yeah. I mean, if we were like the Mediterraneans and we had more complex carbohydrates in our diet, we'd probably be okay, but that is not the American diet. Sad but true. So cholesterol is one of the things you want to check on a fairly regular basis. And let me say one thing about age. If you're 20 and you don't have a family history of high cholesterol, you don't need to check any of this, right? Because these are all things that accumulate with age. Although, you know what? Let me take that back. Because the American diet is so poor that now we're seeing 20-year-olds with high cholesterol. So let's rewind and take that back. It's probably a good idea to talk to your provider about that. What age to start testing. Other ones that you want to test, thyroid, I talked about cholesterol, glucose, especially if you had gestational diabetes, you should be checking your glucose every year. Because half of women who had gestational diabetes will go on to get diabetes later in life. And you don't know when, because diabetes can be silent, so you want to get screened every year for your blood glucose. That's basically the standard ones, I would say. Other ones that it might be good to look at from time to time, vitamin D. Vitamin D is a big antioxidant in our bodies, and also helps us build our bones. We don't absorb calcium without vitamin D. And the way our bodies are naturally designed to make vitamin D is skin exposure to sunshine. However, most Americans don't go outside nearly enough. So you make vitamin D, the amount of vitamin D you make depends on how melanated your skin is. So you can imagine two groups of people who are not gonna make enough. People who are very fair and burn in the sun, right? Because they're just not gonna go out, they burn before they can make vitamin D. And people who are very dark, they're not gonna make enough vitamin D and they're not gonna be out in the sun as long as they need to be. So for me, midsummer, I would need to be out with 2 arms or 2 legs bare for 2 hours every day to make enough vitamin D, right? And if you're fairer than me, you might need to be out 15 minutes every day, midsummer, to get enough vitamin D. So what happens in Arizona midsummer? We don't go outside at all, right? So we definitely don't get enough vitamin D for that reason. And also dermatologists have told us, put your sunscreen on. Then you're not gonna make vitamin D either. So now, these days, everybody probably at least once should get their vitamin D checked. Mine was low. And at one point, everyone in our office pretty much did it, and there were 2 people who weren't low in the whole office. Because that's just the nature of it, we don't go out enough. So the best way to get vitamin D is to take it in a pill. There's just no getting around that. We just don't go in the sun enough. And we don't wanna get skin cancer, which is real. The dermatologists are right. So vitamin D is good to check from time to time. If you are a menstruating woman and you have heavy periods, your doctor's probably already recommended this, but if you haven't, you should get your blood count checked. Because when you have a period, you're losing blood, and more importantly, you're losing iron. We need iron to make sure that we build enough blood cells, white blood cells, red blood cells, platelets. If we don't have enough iron, we won't build enough, and that's gonna make us chronically fatigued. Depending on how low, it can make you cranky, it can make you very sleepy. And so if you're having periods and you're having heavy bleeding, you wanna get that checked. If you don't know if you're having heavy bleeding, ask your doctor. Because women are terrible at diagnosing their own heavy bleeding. And when I say that, I mean it on both ends. So there are women who are basically hemorrhaging every month who never tell their doctors they're bleeding. They're like, oh, that's just how it is. And there are women who bleed 3 spots and they're like, I'm hemorrhaging. And you know, it's probably true that it's not just women. When people see their blood outside their bodies, they have a very hard time measuring how much it is. I think that's probably a human thing, just women have periods, So if you're not sure, talk to your doctor, because that's something women miss a lot. Because we're stoic too, women don't complain. And then kidney function is another one, especially as we get older. And that one periodically. If your kidney function is normal, you don't need to check it every year or 2 years, maybe every 5 years or so, just to take a look. Because kidney disease is real when it happens. So, but in terms of routine screening tests, definitely glucose, thyroid function, because that's just common, your cholesterol. Those are the top 3 that you want to be looking at. Questions about that?
You say routine, that's like every year?
Depending on you. So if you had normal results, I would say every 3 years. But if
Okay.
it was abnormal, it might be a little bit more often. But when you go for your annual, it's one of the things that should come up to talk about. And then I was talking about the hormones for women. And you can see here, the only point of this slide is to show you that the numbers aren't always the same. So progesterone, and these are days of your cycle. So 0 to 8, it should be 0 to 8 as it turns out. And then there are certain points in the cycle, like this is pregnancy, it can go up to 90, right? There's certain points in the cycle where it's 25, right? So these numbers are always shifting. Same for estrogen. Beginning of your cycle, it could be up to 122, mid-cycle 433, menopause, it should be less than 41. And so these, normally your hormones shift. In menopause, it is normal to have low levels of estrogen. That's what is normal for you. Now, and that is not to say that we wouldn't use hormones if you were having symptoms, right? We use hormones as treatment in a lot of areas. And sometimes that's appropriate for you, depending on your age, depending on your symptoms. And then just a quick note about birth control pills. So I mentioned before, estrogens increase your risk of blood clots. They do that for everybody. They do it at all ages, but the risk is low for most women. And it is lower, absolute, orders of magnitude lower than a pregnancy. And so this is just some information about birth control pills and heart disease. One more note, this might be here later on, But birth control pills actually have a lot of benefits that people don't commonly hear about. Birth control pills are the one medicine that we know that can reduce your risk of ovarian cancer. So if you have a family history of ovarian cancer and you're young, you're still childbearing age, you don't want to take your uterus and ovaries out, that would be drastic. Or even if you have the gene for ovarian cancer, birth control pills are probably a tool that should be in your toolkit to think about, because it's the one thing we know that can decrease that risk. And they also decrease your risk of colon cancer and uterine cancer. So those are benefits that people commonly don't talk about. We always talk about the risks, but those are actually benefits and nothing to sneeze at. That's pretty important. Colon cancer is the #2 cancer killer of people in the country. It vies with lung cancer from year to year. So, and then birth control pills. And I talked about treatment of heavy periods. That is a big one that we use birth control pills for, that sometimes, can really cause problems in all sorts of areas. Missing work, or missing your activities, fatigue, and needing transfusions, etc. And we use the pill for those. So it will be great if we didn't call them birth control pills, because we use them for so many other things. And people have this idea about birth control pills, and really, it's like hormonal treatment is what we should call them. Bioidentical hormones, it's a big one. So the idea behind bioidentical hormones is used so much, the term bioidentical is used so much, that people don't even know what it means anymore. But really, when people first started talking about it, the reason they did is because the early estrogens that we had were developed from horse urine, right? So, because horses are huge, they make a lot of estrogen, and what scientists did was they took horse urine and they extracted out the estrogen in a chemical process, right, to get the estrogen out of it. And people are like, oh, that's terrible, right? And is that even estrogen I should have in my body? Is that human estrogen? It's horse estrogen. So this really made people feel some kind of way, and they were like, I don't want estrogen from horses. I want estrogen. So bioidentical became a term to mean non-animal sources of estrogen, so plant sources of estrogen. But then people started saying, well, if women have, and we have 3 types of estrogen in our bodies, 3 sort of estrogen compounds. Well, why don't I get those? That's what I normally have in my body. Why don't I get those? And so there are people around the country who started giving women all 3 of those kinds of estrogen as a replacement for whatever they were using it for, because that's more bioidentical. So it's used for that sense too. These days, in the modern era, pharmaceutical companies make estrogens that are not from horses. They make plant-based estrogens. So you can get a prescription for an estrogen that is plant sourced. You can get a prescription for an estrogen that's one of the other ones that we have in our bodies, not just the estradiol. So now, because of course, what are pharmaceutical companies gonna do? What makes money, right? So when women started having this demand, they started responding and making these different kinds of estrogen. So you don't just have to get bioidentical hormones from a compounding pharmacy. You can actually get a prescription for a pharmaceutical company, pharma pill or a cream or patch that has bioidentical hormones. And why is that important to point out? Remember I said earlier, when you're compounding medicines, the batch to batch, there can be a lot of variation. And they're not regulated. So compounding pharmacies are not regulated. Technically they're regulations, but really there are no inspectors that go out unless something happens. But pharmaceutical companies are regulated, and they have regular inspections to make sure that from pill to pill or patch to patch, there's the same amount of medicine and there's the amount that they say is in it, right? And so that can be an advantage for someone who can't have dose variations or who's sensitive to something. So sometimes you need to get a pharma formulation, and so it's important to know that they have bioidentical options too. So all that said, does it make a difference? Are bioidentical hormones safer? No. They have the same side effects as the ones you get from pharma. There's no evidence to show that if you get a compounded estrogen or progesterone, it is safer for you or better for you or works better than the one you get a prescription from your doctor. And so there are some handouts about that as well. So vitamins and heart health, I talked about the ones already, so I won't go over this again. They're not, the vitamin industry is another unregulated industry. And so people have done studies. Every couple of years someone does this. They buy a bunch of brands and a bunch of different vitamins, and then they test them to see what's in them. Is there anything in there that's not the vitamin? And is the vitamin in there? And is the amount that they say on the jar there? And they do terribly. Every time. It's scandalous. How sometimes, let's say it's vitamin B12, there'll be no B12 in the pills at all. Like, it's scandalous. And it varies from brand to brand. So it's very important. There are a few brands, even though they're over the counter, unregulated, and I can't tell you them off the top of my head, but I can get the sources for you, that are reliable and do their own internal testing and really have an ethic within their company. But most of them, like most of the you can get at CVS and Walgreens, I wouldn't pay money for them. The other part of vitamins, there's that, what's in the pill, but then does it make any difference? There are very few vitamins that we know make a difference. So vitamin D, I talked about, makes a difference because our bodies are designed to make it, we're not making it. Vitamin D, yes, take it.
And so that just reminded me of kind of the absorption issue. So, because I talked to my mom about that, she said, a lot of times there's a coupling of things that need to be taken at the same time. So is vitamin D one that needs to be in tandem with something else for the absorption quality?
No, but I'm glad you said that because let me talk about calcium next.
Okay.
So we talk about calcium replacement a lot, and we talk about taking a supplement. Well, as it turns out, our bodies are designed to absorb only about 400 milligrams of calcium at a time. So you see these 600 milligram pills, right? You think you're doing something? You're just making vitamin-enriched poop. That's all. Because our bodies don't absorb it. And our bodies are designed to absorb calcium best from food. So let's say you take your calcium pill with milk. You're going to absorb the calcium from the milk and poop out all that pill you just took. Because our bodies, I guess we're evolved or grown or made to drink milk, right? So our bodies know how to take calcium from milk and not so much from a pill. It's just not, that's not to say we don't absorb any, but we just don't absorb it as well, and we will preferentially absorb it from food. Those receptors will take it from the food first and let that go, right? And so if you try to take calcium with iron, the iron will interfere with calcium absorption. So that's one that you shouldn't do. So spinach, for example. Spinach is high in calcium, but you can't count it as a source of calcium because it's also high in iron. And the iron is gonna interfere with the calcium absorption. So we don't talk about spinach as a source of calcium, even though there's a lot in it, because we won't absorb it. Similarly, vitamin C increases your absorption of calcium. That's why you'll see calcium fortified orange juice, because vitamin C increases the absorption of calcium. Now, if you're on thyroid medicine, you can't take your thyroid with orange juice, so that's why you need a team to help you, because these things get complicated. Other vitamins that are good for us, omega-3 fatty acids. I'm so glad I have this slide, because those really relate a lot to heart disease. Why? Because omega-3 fatty acids are a type of fat, and they're the type of fat you find in fish, in flaxseed, in evening primrose oil, in something else that the vegans like a lot. Flax, and it'll come back to me what it is. It's a vegetable source. And it turns out that these types of oils have an anti-inflammatory effect in our bodies. And there's a relationship between inflammation and heart disease. One of the issues with the fats that we have in our diet, meat fats and butter fats, etc., it's not the fat necessarily, it's that that's all we get. Because Americans also are terrible at eating fish, right? So we don't get the fish oils, we don't get the flax oils, and so the balance of omega-3s, which these are, to omega-6, which is the predominant fat in meat, etc., our balance is off. So our bodies are in an inflammatory state. These help us be less inflammatory, and these, as a result, they're associated with a decreased risk of heart disease. So if you like fish, eat fish, it's good for you. If you don't like fish, you may want to consider a supplement. But then again, that's where brand is important, because fish oils can go rancid, they can have mercury in them. So the source, I would never buy a cheap fish oil from the store, because chances are it's from China, and China doesn't care about mercury. They just care about selling it. So you really have to look at your brand for this one.
Well, I was just gonna ask, because you see all those at the store, so where would you go to buy them?
You want to go more to like a Whole Foods or a Sprouts, because the thing about Whole Foods and Sprouts, they're, especially Whole Foods, they're expensive, but they're expensive because they do the research for you. Which is not to say 100% of the products they carry are going to be good, but more of them will be, because they do the research for you. They try to find the brands that are reliable, that are pure, etc.
Is it better to take just certain vitamins as opposed to taking a multivitamin?
It's better to eat food, actually. Because then you don't have to worry about purity, you don't have to worry about what's in it. Your body will get the right proportion. So when we eat, half our meal should be vegetables, and all the colors. Purple cabbage, and yellow peppers, and Brussels sprouts, and green beans, and half, every day, every meal, half should be vegetables.
The reason why I say that is because my husband swears by his multivitamin.
So does mine.
So does the company that sells them. They enjoy that he swears by them. But most of the things of vitamins, we have no evidence that it's going to help you whatsoever. Yeah. And far less that it's in there. Right? And if you eat vegetables, if you eat real food, you're going to get it. And then there's the absorption issue, which you pointed out. We don't know that we're even absorbing it. Right? Yeah. So that's the thing about spending your money on a lot of vitamins is, are you really getting the benefit? We don't know. But vitamin D, omega-3 fatty acids are a good choice, but I would recommend eat fish and take the vitamin D with a pill. Eat lots of veggies. So how can you keep your heart healthy? We kind of covered this and what we've been talking about. So if you have diabetes, make sure it gets treated. Try to avoid diabetes, lots of activity, keeping your body mass index down, eating lots of veggies, not so much on the carbohydrates, because that's what's going to keep your body mass index down. But diabetes runs in families, and it's genetic, and some people get diabetes very early. They get it even when they're thin, and so you just have to manage it, right? Blood pressure. It's important to know what your blood pressure is, and every year when you go to the doctor, you should be getting your blood pressure checked. If you go to a doctor's office and they're not checking your blood pressure every time, get a new one. They should be checking it every time. That's low-hanging fruit to help people stay healthy, and we should all be doing it. Even if you're going to eye doctor, they should be checked, because it's such an easy thing we can do to help everyone stay healthy. I'm an OBGYN, but I have diagnosed hypertension in a bunch of patients. And they'll say to me, well, it's normally, it's usually normal. It's only hard when I come in your office. I'm like, well, take it at home. Let's see what it is. And come back and let's talk about it. And like I said, a number of people, it's persistently been high, and they got on medicine. Because we have good diabetes is challenging, but we have great medicines for hypertension. And hypertension is usually asymptomatic. You can't tell when your blood pressure is high, you don't feel it, there are no signs. Many people have high blood pressure and don't know it till they have the stroke. Luther Vandross, one of my favorite singers ever, he lost Luther to a stroke by hypertension, right? Director John Singleton, hypertension, 51, gone, hypertension. High cholesterol, like I talked about, it's not as simple as people make it out to be, but if your cholesterol is in the thousands, you absolutely should be on medicine. There's so much controversy about the medicine for cholesterols, who needs it, how many people, etc. So if your cholesterol is 150, maybe not you, but if it's 1,050, you need it, right? So you really want to think about when is a medicine appropriate for you, and again, get your team to help you. Thyroid disease I talked about, smoking. Smoking is just paying people to kill you. It really is. There's no good reason for smoking cigarettes, and you're paying them a lot. You're paying a lot of money for the diseases they're giving you. So if you smoke, we can give you help to quit. If you know someone who smokes, let's get them quit. Smoking is just, there's no good reason for it. And it's harder for women to quit smoking than for men. Because we have lungs and a heart that's designed to transform to make these babies, it makes us different in a way that either nicotine is more addicting or I don't know what, but it is more difficult, so it'll take more attempts. I have any number of patients who will say, my husband just quit cold turkey, oh my God, now he's struggling. It's easier for them to quit than it is for us. The other important thing to know about smoking, and if you have a smoker in your life, you can tell them this, when men quit smoking, their lung function increases. It never gets back to normal, but it gets a little bit better. Women, whatever damage you've done, that's what you got. You never get better. Yeah, so just don't do it. Eating a healthy diet, we talked about half your meal being vegetables, a simple way to think about. And did I mention corn and potatoes, not vegetables? Be active every day. In fact, right before I came here, I had an extra 15 minutes and I was like, I'm gonna go take a little walk, you know? Because you gotta fit it in, right? You gotta fit it in where you can. Because I know once I go home, it's not gonna happen. And again, don't smoke. That's so important, I said it twice. What fanciness was I doing with this slide? Oh, and that was the end of it. This is just our next one. So we'll I'll stop talking there and then we'll let's go to the questions and see what we've got. Mm-hmm.
I don't know that this one relates to what you've talked about.
Okay, it's okay.
I turned 50 last June.
Mm-hmm.
I used to run a 9+ minute mile.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm running like an 11+ minute mile, no
Mhm.
matter how many times I go out,
Mhm.
how hard I run, and interval training. What happened?
I don't know what happened, but our bodies do change. And we have to get used to the new normal now.
No, that's not the answer I want.
Yeah, well, that's the answer. But here's a little bit of hope. You may be in a transition. Because our body, it's a transition, right? Like puberty was a transition, menopause is a transition. So I would say, don't beat yourself up over it. Be where you are and see where you are in 2-3 years. You may be back to your 9-minute mile, but you may not. You may be at a new normal. Our bodies change. If you're not having any other symptoms, if it's the only thing that's bugging you, I would say, it's okay. It's all right. Yeah, there are times, and I have to say that a lot, because there are a lot of phases where our bodies change. And I have to tell people, our bodies do change. We're growing and changing as long as we're alive. We have a conception that when we reach 21, right, we reach adulthood, then we'll be the same and then die. And that is not how our bodies work. Our bodies are growing and changing throughout our lives, and then we die. Other questions?
So,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't sound like you like the pellet, the hormone pellet.
I do not like the pellets, and maybe I'm biased. And the reason, though, I don't like them is because you can't do anything about them when you have a problem.
Right,
That's the main reason I don't like them.
right, but do you agree that women should get hormones later on in life?
Only if they need them, only if they're having them. Because the natural state for women is not to have hormones. It's just the natural state.
What if you're having hot flashes and
For
night sweats?
so if they need them, right, if they have symptoms. The other thing I don't like about pellets, it's too easy to forget what's in them. I see women all the time and I say, well, what's in your pellet? She's like, I don't know. What? You're getting these hormones and you're not sure if you have estrogen and progesterone, testosterone, if they added something extra in there. Like, it's so easy not to know what's in them. But my biggest beef is when there are complications, you just gotta ride it out, girl, hugs. That's all I can do, Yeah, because you can't get them back. You can't take them out.
And what's the downside if you wait 5-6 years and then start on the hormones?
Because
Why is
as
that?
it turns out, your body changes. One of those changes I talked about. And so to just get real technical, on our cells we have receptors for hormones. And the receptors help the hormone get into our cells to do their work. It seems like once you go through menopause, your body, what we call down-regulates those receptors. It just gets rid of them because your body's like, I don't need them anymore. And that makes sense, right? That's how our bodies work in a lot of areas. And then when you put hormones in the body, they run around and do bad things because they don't go into the cells, including increase your risk of heart attack, stroke, breast cancer, etc. So, yeah, if an interval has gone by since menopause, it seems like your body does that change, and your body's like, no more hormones here. And then when you add the hormones back, instead of going into the cells that they should, they go places where they shouldn't because they're just running around in your body, not taken up the way they ought to be. That's what we think is going on. But we're just learning because this finding, the WHI was 2004 or so? So now studies are ongoing to try to figure this out a little bit better. I saw another hand somewhere, did I?
So, you said that taking the hormones when you need it. So, I'm in the perimenopausal stage, and I'm using the progesterone cream because I am having some. But so it's not estrogen, it's progesterone. So, but I'm kind of in that long perimenopausal stage, which is like
it can be
10
long.
years, right? Up to 10 years.
Yeah.
So, is that okay?
Yeah, perimenopausal is very different from what you just described, the woman who's 5 years out and restarts. And it looks like for those women, your body never down regulates the receptors, right? You still have all your receptors that you had when you were, not all, right? You still have the receptors you had when you were 30, 35. And so your body's just like, oh, okay, hormone receptor, I know what to do with that. It's when you stop the hormones, it seems like your body turns that system off. And then when hormones come in, there's nothing, no healthy system for it to go to. So they just go and do things we don't want them to
Does
do.
it seem to help with the sleep, the kind of sleep
Yeah.
disruption? And
So when women are having symptoms of the hot flashes, some of the other changes that go along with perimenopause, it's appropriate. And it's inappropriate to say, well, suffer, And that's what some doctors were doing after the WHI. They were just like, girl, good luck. And women are sweating their lives away, they can't sleep, their mood is off, and we're not treating them, and we should be treating them appropriately. So there's an appropriate role for hormone replacement. It's just not when you're 75 and you want your hair to be better. Because actually, as it turned out, the WHI showed that didn't make a difference. So there was no difference between women taking hormones and not taking hormones in their skin, their sense of well-being, their hair. None of that was different.
So you would still prescribe hormones like the pellet does, but.
Right, just not in a pellet. In a way that you can stop it if there was a problem. Yeah, the patch, the pill, yeah. And if you could get the pellets back, if it was like an implant under your skin, great, because when there was a problem, you just take it out.
Right.
But you can't retrieve them. Did I see your hand?
Me? I'm 62. Shit's breaking down, so. Suck it up, buttercup.
Well, no, what specific, because it's hard to say in general. So we used to have this idea, even in medicine, that when you age, shit breaks down. Now we're realizing that these are specific problems, many of which can be addressed. So it really depends on what the issue is, what we would do about it. Like I said about the hot flashes, right? It's inappropriate to say to a woman, it's just menopause, suck it up.
Well,
so yeah.
I still get hot flashes.
Yes.
My mother-in-law, who's 84, still gets hot flashes.
And in fact, there are more and more studies about that, about the fact, because years ago we would say, no, you're not. And now there's studies coming out to say that there's some women who continue to have hot flashes well into their 70s. I think the particular study I just saw. Things that can make a difference though. Omega-3 fatty acids make a difference. And also decreasing carbohydrates. There's something about carbohydrate intake, maybe it's the inflammation. Oh, I forgot to say that. Carbohydrates are pro-inflammatory, right? So, maybe that's why omega-3 fatty acids can work, and decreasing carbohydrates can work.
alcohol too makes the hot flashes go up.
Yep. So you want to decrease triggers.
Sorry.
I know. Decrease carbohydrates and increase omega-3 fatty acids. That can really help.
Okay.
And in fact, even before the studies came out, I had women telling me, when I eat well, when I really, do good, because we consider that doing good, I don't have the hot flashes. That was my first hint that sugars had something to do with it. Because women would tell me, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, there are things you can do though. There are things. We've also learned, to talk about hot flashes for a second, that a low dose of some of the antidepressant medicines actually can help with hot flashes as well. And those don't have any risk of blood clotting like the estrogens do, and they can work well. 60% of women can get benefit from that. And you can do those at any age, regardless of what else is going on. Other questions? Does someone want to check me on the questions on the flyer to see if I went through all of them?
Sure. Women need to worry about breast cancer, not heart disease.
Right, so we talked about that. Yep.
My doctor said lose weight to improve my heart health, but since menopause, I just can't shed the pounds.
Right, and so we talked about weight a little bit, right? Weight isn't, a high weight does not equal heart disease. That is not the case. What we look at weight is as a proxy, as a risk factor, right? So if your weight is, let's say your BMI is 32, but you exercise every day, you eat a healthy diet, then your weight isn't the issue, right? Because really, your weight is your weight. It's just what it is. What we want is for you to be healthy. So I always want people to focus on health, not necessarily their weight, right? Because we live in a size-obsessed culture that tells us smaller is always better and that big is always bad, and that is not the case. So you want to focus on health. So if you're healthy and your body size is bigger, I'm not as concerned. But let's say it isn't. Then you want to do what I just mentioned about diet. half your diet is vegetables, half your plate is vegetables, every meal, quarter of your plate is protein, not so much on the carbohydrates, maybe 3-4 days a week and not 7. And when you have carbohydrates, measure them. Quarter cup of rice, quarter cup of corn, quarter baked potato. Because why? Our taste buds love carbohydrates, and our taste buds are liars, right? This has happened to you, where you're like, I only had a little piece of cake, but it's gone, right? That's happened to us all. Or the bag of whatever it is you enjoy, right? Is it gone already? You were about to get more and it's gone, right? So you want to measure your carbohydrates. So if you're stuck and you need to lose weight for a health reason, that is probably, that way of eating is probably the way we should all eat. Right, we think of it as diabetics should eat that way. If you're losing weight, you should. No, we should all eat that way. Actually, men, women, children. That's the healthy way to eat for all of us.
We addressed the other two. I'm only 30 and I don't have any energy. Should I get my hormones checked?
Hormones, but not necessarily your estrogen, progesterone, your thyroid. We should check your blood count, right? We talked about that, anemia.
And what are
Yeah, so we covered that one.
And that's it.
Awesome. Any other questions?
I'm not pleased with your response.
but I would say first be patient. Give yourself at least a couple of years to get through the menopausal transition to see what your new normal is, to see where you're at. Because we transition and we have to respect that. We live in a culture that says now, right? Especially for a runner.
Yeah.
She likes it fast. But that's not how our bodies work. Our bodies go through transitions. And, puberty was years long. And in fact, puberty started long before you saw puberty, right? Puberty started with, we talk about 4 stages, and the colloquial is boobs, pubes, spurt, and squirt. You get breast development, you get pubic hair development, you have a growth spurt, and then you have a period. Puberty starts long before that period starts, probably about 2 years before, and goes on for about 2 years after. So give menopause at least 4 years. Okay. It's not easy. Yeah. All right, ladies, thank you so much for coming. And if we have your email, I'll send you these slides so you'll have all the links.
Okay, so I'll make sure to send. Okay, perfect. Thank you.